Um, this is our BIPOC Booktopia creator chat. I'm JS Living, and then we also have, is it Rella up
Yes,
here?
Rella B.
Yes, we have Rella B up here. So I guess we can start by telling like what our projects are and like the genre, and then we can go from there. So my project is Blood Ties, a collection of three Covenant of Blood shorts. It's urban fantasy meets historical fiction. Tells the story of three different characters from my debut novel, The Covenant of Blood. And yeah, it's really cool. Or I think it's really cool. And if you want to hear a reading of it, uh, we did a live stream earlier today. So you guys can hear it up there. Rella, what's your project about?
So my book is called If Shapes Could Eat. I am a kidlit author, and right now the goal for my book is basically getting kids to try new foods and understand that we all need different things when it comes to food. I have a younger brother that is allergic to peanuts, so whenever I eat peanuts, I have to make sure that I wash my hands, I don't use the same utensils he does, and just different things like that. I don't think that's something that kids think about all the time because it's not something that they have to think about. So in my project, I'm basically trying to teach empathy as well as encourage kids to try new foods. It's depicted by different personified shapes. So I have a little rhombus here that loves to eat sweets, and then I have this little hexagon that is actually allergic to peanuts. So throughout the story, they have different obstacles that they're both dealing with and they're helping each other through. So I'm really excited about that. And this is the second book in my series of If Shapes Could Talk. So they all just go through different scenarios that we would go through in regular life. My first book, If Shapes Could Talk, was about these little shapes meeting each other and like learning how to be friends, but also not to compare and contrast against each other because it's so easy to fall into like, well, I don't have this or they have that, especially when it comes to social media.
Yeah, that's really cool. So I actually have a significant other and my nephew who are both allergic to like wheat or gluten products. So does your book cover that?
So the whole thing in the book, she's allergic to meat, nuts, shellfish, and I think there's one other thing. She's allergic to a lot of things, but I don't I don't think it's not like wheat or gluten. But it just talks about how it is difficult to have different allergies. And so it's nice to have like an allergen-free space. Um, even though she's not allergic to everything though.
I mean, I would hope not. I mean, if you're allergic to everything, what's left to eat?
Exactly. But I mean, it just goes over basically being empathetic towards people that have allergies. And then in your book, I know you're saying that this is basically the collection of all three of your books. So can you tell us a little bit about like the main characters that are in your books?
Yeah, but quick revision. It's not a trilogy. It's a short story collection based on the characters for my debut novel.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Sorry, I just wanted to clarify. I don't want people to get it and be like, "Oh my gosh, it's not three books in one."
Okay, sorry.
No, you're good. But I forgot what the rest of your question was now.
Oh, just going over like the main characters that are in your book and like kind of how they came about.
Yeah. So the three characters in this short story collection are Liz Bathory, who is trapped in a mind prison. So think about like if you have your body and then like there's another mind trapped in your subconscious. The person trapped in your subconscious would be Liz. Um, and then the other characters are Dimitri Kovacs, who is so Liz is trapped inside Lizzie's body. And Dimitri is Lizzie's boyfriend. So the second story is about him. And then the third story is about Angelo, who I don't want to say too much about him because if people get the debut novel, then it would spill some secrets. But just know he's another love interest. And the way it works out is interesting. But in terms of how I got the ideas for these characters, my debut novel, The Covenant of Blood, actually came about because I was teaching my students how to cite for sources back when I was teaching undergrad at my alma mater. And then at the same time, I was doing like creative writing courses at a library just for funsies as just like a volunteer type thing. And so one of the sources that my students had to look for was like how to cite specific things about Elizabeth Bathory. And then for the creative writing group, we were talking about writing a letter with someone who shares your name. And so because I was doing these two things at once, I was like, okay, so what if, you know, Elizabeth Bathory had a child? And I was like, oh, but what if that child was also the son of, you know, Vladimir Tepish or Bram Stoker's, not Bram Stoker's Dracula, the historical figure is Vladimir Tepish. So it's like, what if those two had a kid because they're both considered vampires and like folklore literature kind of thing. And so that's how that book was born. And so Liz became a character because I started with Lizzie and then there was like a whole thing going on where like Lizzie would black out and I was like, well, why is she blacking out? And so Liz was created. And so there's a little bit of research that went into it, not a ton, but just enough to make it somewhat historically accurate. So yeah.
That's amazing. And I really do applaud that, like, to it to kind of tie to history. Because I really enjoy when things are a little bit, at least a little bit factually correct. Like when somebody says
Mhm.
something that doesn't make any sense at all, it's a little bit wild to me. Like I've seen some movies where they say things and I'm like, that's not how that works, like at all.
Yeah, it took a little finagling on my part. But I think it worked out nicely. And obviously, you know, my debut is an add-on. So I think it works best if you get both. But if people don't get both, then the short story collection is a really good way to dip your toes in because it kind of shows you like my voice and things. Likewise, I would think that if we got your first book, you said it was called If Shapes Could Talk, right?
Yes, and I do
Yeah,
have that
yeah.
book as well as an add-on.
Yeah, so if we got If Shapes Could Talk, I'm sure that that would create like a bit more interest in like your new one If Shapes Could Eat because we'd be learning about the characters early on. So I think we're kind of
Yeah.
similar in that way.
Yes, definitely. The only thing is, for your books, do you have to read them in a certain order or no?
No,
Okay.
no, you don't, which is the beauty of it. Because after this campaign, I'm actually going to do another one for the second book in the series, but it'll also be a standalone. So it's going to be, they're all going to be interconnected stories, but they're all separate. So you can read them separately or out of order or in order, whatever you want to do.
Okay, that's super awesome. And then I would love to ask, are the characters in your stories people of color?
Oh, for sure. So, when I was researching for this book, I did kind of deviate from the history a little bit because technically, technically the historical figures would have been from Hungary. I still have them from Hungary, but they're, you know, I made my main character present as Black. I guess she could technically be mixed race if you want to get into the technicalities of it, but she's a Black character, and that's because she was born Black and she has the ability to choose whatever kind of, I guess, skin color, bodily features she wants, and she chooses to present as Black, so therefore she's a Black woman.
Interesting. I've never thought about that, like a race shifter kind of thing. Never
Yeah.
considered that.
I thought it would be interesting to have a character who chooses to be Black. Like they have the ability to be something else, but they choose to be Black. Um, and so I think basically almost all of my characters are Black. Not all of them, but most of them are. Because I thought it was very important to have Black representation in urban fantasy since we don't get that as much, especially in like adult urban fantasy.
And I totally understand that. I feel like when I see a lot of mainstream children's media or when I go over the top 100 children's books, the majority of them don't always have Black characters in them.
Mhm.
And then I do have a book that will be coming out later that has a Black character in it, and I'm super excited about it. It's beautiful, so beautiful. Like the cover is amazing. But I felt like I did people a little bit of a disservice by coming up with shape characters, but I love them so much because not only can I teach about different things like dietary diversity, but I'm also teaching about shapes and colors as well. So it spans like a broad area for different age ranges because
Mhm.
even though they may not understand the full vocabulary or understand that people necessarily need to eat different things, they can go over their shapes and their colors as well. So that was kind of a goal for this series. I did feel like I might have done a little bit of a disservice though to the BIPOC community by choosing to go with shape characters instead of people of color though.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I was going to ask why you chose shapes over like just depicting actual people. Was it just easier to like draw the shapes, or was it just that you just thought it would be easier to get your message across through shapes as opposed to Black or multiracial characters?
No, so for this series, ultimately I have like a really big picture production in mind, and I would love to have the shapes end up being their own cartoon. Whether or not that happens, I'm not sure, but I really enjoy having these two characters and like a lot of different characters as well because they can relate to any child of any color. Um, all children know different shapes and different colors. So I just wanted kids to be able to relate on some form. Like some kids have allergies, some kids don't, and both are represented here. And so there's a lot
Right.
of other like representation that's in the book as well, such as like veganism, and they just go over like a lot of different things, like touching on it, and it's in a really fun and cute way. And the shapes eventually we'll have like different characters added in. So these two are the main characters in my first book and my second book. But going forward, I'm going to introduce different characters as well. So I would love for them to have like their own little series because, we have series with little mer people and with cats. There's so many different series out there. So I'm like, shapes could definitely be a series as well. So we'll see what
Oh, for
happens
sure.
with that.
For sure. I think I had one other question for you, and it might seem a little, I'm gonna try to phrase it nicely, just because it's a huge discussion, I know, in terms of kidlit, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it. So, I know back in 2015, and I think it still holds true today, even in 2024, that a lot of books that are for kids typically don't have BIPOC in it. Like you typically get like you have shapes or you get like animals or if you have actual people, it's usually not a Black character. It's usually like white, and sometimes you'll see some with like Asian or Hispanic characters, but it's very seldom that you see like Black characters. So did that particular discussion like shape your choice shape your choice to do shapes in your book, or did you not look into that? I'm just curious.
Right. So when I wrote this book, I wasn't technically an author yet. Like I was just writing.
Hmm.
And I thought that this was a beautiful concept because I was like, this would be amazing. My daughter was learning shapes and colors at the time. And my daughter is mixed race. So my first book that I wrote was of a little girl that was mixed race and she had a mixed family. So she looks like my daughter. And then we also have like myself, my brother, like all depicted in it. So her family is multicultural. Um,
Hmm.
then after I published those two books, then I read more about basically the kidlit space and everything that like goes into it. I really wanted to have more characters that represent me. So that's why I'm coming out with my third book. It won't be done for a while, but I'm really excited about that book because I do feel like it's really important that we are able to see beautiful Black, brown, children of color in general depicted in storybooks, and especially storybooks that are done really well. So that's one of those books that honestly, the illustrations will cost more in that book than any other book that I've had because it's going to be beautiful. And I'm
Mhm.
really excited that that's going to be my first book that I do have the main character be a person of color. Because in my other book, it's the little girl is mixed race, and like I'm in it. So obviously I'm brown, and my little brother is in it as well, and he's brown as well. And we're two of the like main supporting characters. So it's like a mixed family, which is great. But the little girl on the cover is a mixed girl.
Right.
And it's not that I don't love my daughter and I don't love representing her culture or anything like that, but when I realized that I needed to fill more of a gap, I was like, oh, okay, cool. Like the next two books that I make with actual people in them will be people of color. And I've already
Right.
been writing those. And then this is a preview into something like way in the future. It's not happening right now, it's still in concept. But I don't know if you've ever seen the like the Russian nesting dolls. I think they're
Hmm.
called Matroska or something like that. But I used to love playing with them. I collect them. I absolutely adore them. And so I'm actually going to be making a story about those little dolls, but they're going to be African American and BIPOC dolls.
Oh, that
So
sounds cool. That's
I'm very
exciting.
excited about it. I've actually seen a book that kind of has that theme already, but mine's going to be completely different. So I'm very excited.
Well, that's great. That's great. Um, yeah, so I know we talked about whether or not we were going to discuss who we serve. So, who do your books serve outside of what you've already told us, like outside of people with allergies or people who need to learn their shapes and colors? Who else is your book serving?
Right. So I would say that my books also serve parents that want to start particular dialogues. And I would say that because I do have a book that's about the different uses of a dollar, just a basic financial literacy book for little kids. And it's a really good tool to just start that conversation about how you should use your money, where you can use your money, and the different like facets that go with money, like debt, interest, saving, spending, and things like that. So I would say that in general, my books are for pre-K until about second grade. And
Mhm.
then parents that just want to use them as tools to start conversations with their kids. What about you?
So like I said, I feel like my books serve those who are looking for Black representation within the urban fantasy genre. Um, I got really inspired back when I was in grad school by reading, like Nick Stone and JL and all these other Black authors who are coming out in the YA space. And my first book was actually a YA novel that I did finish, but because I thought it was trash, I have not published it yet. Because I just feel like it needs a lot of work before I
Mm,
get there. But those are like my inspirations. And because this book kind of just came out of nowhere, like it wasn't planned, like my first book was planned, this one wasn't. But when I really got into it, I was like, okay, so my character's technically from Hungary, but I want to make her Black because we don't have this Black representation. And so just had to figure out a way to do that, which I did. And so uh I guess it just serves as like a way for like us to see ourselves within that space.
yeah, I completely understand that. Do you feel like you've gotten really good feedback as far as the way that you've depicted your character in the books?
Well, I haven't actually had anyone come up to me and be like, "Oh my gosh, like I love the Black representation." But I will say, as an indie author, I've sold over 100 copies of this book, which is pretty good because most indie authors don't even crack 100.
Right.
Now, granted, this is over a 2-year period, but I still think it's pretty cool because most people don't. And then I have had people, oh, actually, I do have one cool story. So I did a book signing back in my hometown, which is Augusta, Georgia. Some of the scenes in the books in my debut novel take place there. Um, but I was there signing copies of the book, and I had this man come up to me and he wanted to introduce his daughter to me because he wanted her to know that there were Black authors like who were writing books about Black characters. So I thought that was pretty cool. And then I had another father who came up to me And he brought a copy of the book and he was telling me about how his daughter wanted to be a writer. But she didn't know any Black authors. And so I got to sign her book and leave her a message of encouragement, which I felt really good about. So those are like my two little feel good stories about like hopefully how I impacted young authors to write or become, Black authors who write about Black characters. Here's hoping. I don't know if I did. It's not like they've reached out to me or anything, but in my head, I'm hoping that I inspired like some teenager out there to do their thing.
Right. That's really amazing. And I love that. It's a really impactful story. Um, I would love to know your thoughts on maybe authors of color that choose not to write about like people of color or vice versa, like people that are not necessarily of like of the BIPOC representation that do have like characters of color or like a main character story. Do you feel like they can like represent the story well enough, or should people kind of like write more culturally who they're aligned with, if that makes sense?
It does make sense. And I have mixed feelings on the subject. On the one hand, you write what you know. So I feel like if you haven't lived my experience, then you're not going to be able to accurately write about it. And the same goes for me. Like I have no idea what it's like I mean, I can imagine what it's like to be a white man in America, but I don't actually have any idea because I'm not a white man in America. Um, that said, I also think that it's perfectly fine to kind of step outside of your lane if you have people to consult with. So my big thing is like if you're going to be a Black person writing about like an Asian community, for instance, like make sure you're getting feedback from whichever Asian community you're trying to represent. Likewise, if it's the white community or, African community, whatever community it is, if you're writing about LGBTQ plus issues, then hopefully you're getting people from within that to influence your novel and whatnot. So that's my main feeling on it. Just do your research, get as many sensitivity reads as you can, and make sure you're representing it as authentically as possible. Me personally, though, I would rather stick to my main character being Black and my side characters. Those are the ones that I would go and, change and ask other people about representation for because they're side characters. And while the side characters do matter, I feel like, if I'm representing a side character, it's a lot easier to get feedback about those side characters versus trying to get it about a main character, because I just feel like you have to be super careful about your main character, especially in today's age. What are your thoughts on it?
I completely agree because after publishing my first couple of books, I did get some feedback. Um, and one of them was that they didn't like that my little purple rhombus didn't necessarily have a name. And I did that on purpose because one, I didn't really feel like the name was that necessary in this story. And also like it could be a boy, it could be a girl, like it wasn't like any sort of agenda or anything. I just wanted the main character to kind of be like whoever you want it to be.
Mhm.
So I can definitely understand that because of the feedback that I've gotten for an inanimate object. I think it's really important to like have that dialogue, especially when you have like different themes and backstories that can trigger people in like a sensitive communities. And I totally understand that because uh, my little hexagon is actually adopted, but she's going to have her own story that talks about like her adoption process and things like that. So when I do that, I am going to have a lot of sensitivity readers, just making sure that I represent that story appropriately in a way that uplifts children that are in adoption situations, because I don't ever want to make someone feel attacked or extra marginalized after reading one of my books. So I do really understand that. Even when it comes to like obviously characters that aren't real.
Right. Oh, I did have another question. So, ooh, how do I phrase it though? Um, Talking about like marginalized characters and whatnot, how do you feel about, oh my God, I had it and now it's like gone. The thought lost left me. I'll come back to it. Do you have any questions while I try to rephrase and think about what it was I was gonna ask?
Yeah, I feel like I would love to ask how you feel being a person of color has shaped your writing journey as far as from the time you decided that you wanted to be an author until now. Do you feel like there was certain experiences that you went through or apprehensions, anything like that to get where you are today?
So it's funny you mentioned that because I actually just kind of wrote a blog post about one of the defining moments in my life. So I decided I wanted to be a writer in third grade because I had this teacher, her name was Miss Weinstein, who she just encouraged me to do all the writing. And so like I feel like I got really good, at least for that age, at writing at that age. Um, but I also was one of those kids who people made fun of all the time. And so, like, the blog post that I wrote was about the time that I was at the bus stop and some of I can't really say classmates because most of them were older than me, but let's just say my bus mates, I guess, because we all rode the same bus. So it's the time that my bus mates slapped my journal out of my hand or it's a binder. They slapped my binder out of my hand and like a whole bunch of my papers of stories went down the drain. Um, Luckily, they didn't go too far. Like I was able to pick them up or whatever, but they were like wet and soggy and gross. And yeah, I was just happy that the bus driver stopped long enough for me to pick it up. But it was like a very bad experience. And it was because they didn't like what I wrote about them. Because I was one of those people who, since I was made fun of, my stories typically reflected my feelings about those people because that's how I dealt with my anger and my stress was writing out I'm not going to say somewhat, they were very horrible things that I wrote about these people. I'm not even going to pretend. Some of the stories were like pretty gruesome for the age that I was. I'm not even going to lie. So, but yeah, at that age, I learned that not everybody is going to like what you write. But it's up to you to keep on writing it and just to, if there's a shred of truth in it, then that's probably why they don't like it. And you just have to stick with that. Do you have any defining moments like that?
Um, that's really interesting. I don't I don't know if I necessarily have defining moments like that in relation to being a BIPOC author, but like just
Oh, yeah, mine was
like
just general author. That wasn't even a,
okay,
yeah.
okay, perfect, perfect. Because yeah, in general, as an author, yes, like I've had feedback from my books that is definitely changed the way that I like go about writing my books. Um, in general, I decided to become an author, and the catalyst moment was when all of my books were deleted after I had been writing books for 5 years. And they weren't just children's books, some of them were like um, more like guides for different like financial resources and things like that because I've always loved making money on my own terms. It's something that's really important to me, and I feel like there should be a lot more of that in education. So that was one of the main reasons that I decided to write one of my first books about just like the different uses of a dollar for kids to understand and get familiar with. Um, but I think that it's interesting that you say that you were bullied basically when you're younger. And I want to ask if the people that were bullying you were also people of color or not.
Oh no, they were definitely people of color, for the
Okay.
most part. I think one of them may have been Hispanic, but I'm not 100% sure because obviously this is like years ago.
Yeah.
Um, Probably when I think it was like in middle school too. So I think I was in like sixth or seventh grade. But yeah, my school was predominantly Black. So
Okay.
they were definitely Black kids for the most part.
Yeah. It's just interesting. Because I guess I could consider myself like a third culture kid. I grew up
Hmm.
in Japan for 3 years, and then I moved. I don't know where you live, but I live on the West Coast, and I went to a school that was primarily Hispanic. Um,
Hmm.
for middle school and high school, but I went to school in Japan for like elementary school for most of it. And so I had a lot of, I guess, identity issues when it came to kind of like understanding my own culture and who I am because I wasn't around like a lot of like black and brown people. Um,
Hmm.
and I don't know if that's necessarily like depicted in my picture books. I know that someone has said like you should write a book about being a third culture kid because it is an interesting like scenario to
Yeah.
kind of be in. Um, but I've told people before that sometimes like I don't feel black enough or like legitimized enough to do like certain things, but at the same time like I don't feel like any way else, if that makes sense. Like I feel like I'm kind of like mixed in a culture that I don't really understand. Um, and that might encourage me to write characters that are more ambiguous because
Hmm.
everybody can relate to them. Whereas, like, I feel like I have to kind of be a chameleon in certain situations, just from the way that I've been brought up. So,
Right. I was gonna ask if growing up in Japan kind of like shaped your writing journey in some kind of way. I love the idea of Japan. Like, I really want to visit one day. And I have definitely thought about like if I ever have kids, like maybe Japan would be like a good place to raise them. But it sounds like that could be confusing in terms of like culture if you're not, if you're not teaching that or if they don't see that. So I'm curious how growing up there at a young age has influenced you overall.
right. Before I answer that, where are you from? Where do you live and where are you from?
Oh, so I'm definitely born and bred in the States. So I was born in Virginia. I grew up in Georgia, and currently I live in Maryland. So
Oh, okay, very nice. That's
yeah.
awesome. Um, so I would say that growing up overseas definitely like shaped me in a really it's a constructive way because the culture there is amazing. Like it's something you don't always get to see. It broadened my horizons in a lot of ways, and I feel like it made me a very like creative and critical thinker by living in Japan, and it's something that I wouldn't change for the world. Um, but I've lived in the South, I've lived on the West Coast. I travel a lot, and then obviously living in Japan too. It's just I was never bullied or anything like that in Japan when I went to school. I moved here when I was in third grade. So I did K through third, half of third in Japan, and then I moved to Las Vegas when I was in third grade and finished out everything here. And I feel like it didn't really get bad until middle school.
Mhm.
Um, But even like moving from Japan, I was learning how to like speak Japanese and do all these things. And then I moved to Nevada and then I'm learning how to like speak Spanish and do like a whole bunch of different things here. So I think that I think it was a constructive experience, but I think culturally, um, one living on a military base because I did live on a military base. I felt like the kids were maybe a little bit friendlier, but we were also like a lot younger. So maybe that
Mhm.
was part of it. And then moving to Nevada, like I live in Las Vegas specifically. So Las Vegas is a very interesting place when it comes to like just living in Las Vegas in general as a child. I feel like is a very interesting experience. Because I could tell you things that I see on a daily basis, and you would be like, that is strange. That is not normal. Like, um, So I think all of those experiences have definitely shaped my writing journey, um, to the point where I would rather write about like aliens or dystopian civilizations than people in real life, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I think that I personally use my writing as a form of escape, because I just like immersing myself in worlds that are not our own, or at the very least, worlds that are similar to our own, but they have these magical or mythical uh, components to them, to make them a little bit more fantastical. Because the real world, it can be very depressing, especially now and like over the last like what 8 years. I mean, with the political climate and with all the changes that are going on between Congress and with civil rights and our social movements, and the advent of social media and technology has really just skyrocketed like a lot of our issues. So I definitely get the idea of wanting to escape. On the topic of things like Black Lives Matters, civil rights and whatnot, do you think that those events will pop up in a future book of yours, or do you think those events will kind of influence a future book of yours, especially like things like the pandemic and whatnot from 2020, stuff like that?
Not a children's book. I don't think so.
Mm,
I really want my children's books to, it's not that I don't want Black causes to be in children's books. I just don't think that's a direction that I'm going to take.
mm,
Right now, I feel like the two children's books that I have out are a little bit more serious and I want to continue writing. So I think that most of my books will be more fun filled and action filled. Besides, like If Shapes Could Talk is kind of like my more like political book, I suppose. So in this
mhm,
book, there will definitely be like, oh, well, this shape is curvy and these shapes have straight lines, and that will be a theme of a book, but it won't be necessarily tied to a political movement, if that makes sense.
mhm, mhm,
I have started writing some books that are in adult literature, which will be under a completely different pen name.
mhm,
But books like that, I'm very excited to be able to like write more about causes that are related to being a person of color, being marginalized, discriminated against, having a very overbearing political system. Um,
mhm.
so I have not finished a novel yet or a novella or anything like that. So it's been a very interesting journey trying to start that. And on that topic, I would love to know, do you mainly plan on staying in urban fantasy, or are there any other projects that you plan on branching out into?
Oh, okay. So I love urban fantasy. My book is new adult, but I do have like three young adult novels or concepts of them. Like I told you earlier, the first one, it's finished. It's trash, honestly. So it needs to be, no, no, seriously. Like I wrote it in third person, and I was instructed by one of my graduates. I wouldn't say advisors. I guess it's like a mentor, because we had like people come in and like look over our work and kind of give us tips. But she had suggested that I write it in first person. And at the time, I was like, no, I'm not doing that. It's third person. But, like after writing my first new adult novel or adult novel, I'm like, oh, I really do shine better in first person. So that book has to be rewritten in first person. The other two books I had completed during NaNoWriMo challenges, National Novel Writing Month. Um, so technically they're 50,000 words, they're complete, but they have a beginning, middle, and end, but there's a lot of fleshing out that has to be done in
Mm,
between. So I'm hoping one day to like get back to those three projects, but I want to be traditionally published for those three. So I know that there's going to be quite a bit of work, and I just feel like right now I want to focus on my indie new adult novels. That way I can kind of like get the hang of like writing and plotting, and the hang of like what goes into publishing a novel. And I feel like by the time I get to like maybe my third or fourth indie pub book, that's when I'll go back and look at my YA fiction and do traditionally published. And like you, I'm going to publish that under my actual legal name as opposed to my a pen name, because I've always wanted to see my legal name in traditional prints. So that's how I feel about it, or that's what I plan to do in the future.
Interesting. So why traditional publishing for those books specifically?
Just because I've always wanted my YA books to be traditionally published. I mean, I've always wanted to be traditionally published, but since I started on the indie journey, well, I'm not gonna say I started on the indie journey first. I actually started on the traditional route first. But that, like I said, that first book, it wasn't getting picked up. I know why now. So that's when I switched over to indie. But I've always wanted to do traditionally published YA because much like the new adult urban fantasy realm, there aren't a lot of Black individuals within the YA space either. I mean, we have a lot more than we did. Like I said, I mentioned like JL. We've got Tomi Adeyemi now. We have Nicola Yoon. We have Jason Reynolds. I was trying to think of some of the male authors, but I don't buy them as much as I buy the female authors. But anyways, we have a lot more, but I still think we could benefit to having even more than that. And traditionally the trad pub space is just a lot harder to navigate and get through. So I just feel like that's a space I want to break into. I mean, but of course, I also want to break into like television and comic books as well. Like, I want to be like a well-rounded writer who can say like I've written in, across most of the genres that you can write in.
I totally respect that and understand that because I
Right.
always want to have like all of my fingers in every cookie jar as well.
Yeah, I've had mine in I've gotten I think two short stories published. So like I put a check in that box. I've done a novel. This is my first short story collection, so I've checked those boxes. Um, I'm working on a TV script, so that's gonna go somewhere in between my novels and my YA stuff. But yeah, I was working on that. So comic books will be after that. So kind of gonna do a little bit of everything.
That's amazing. And then I would love to just know about what like barriers you feel like you faced and overcome like in your journey.
I don't know that I've really, well, I would say in terms of barriers, Indie Pub has quite a few because there's a sharp learning curve. Are you Indie Pub as well?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So there's like a sharp learning curve about learning what does and what does not work. There's a sharp learning curve about learning like who you can trust, who to publish with, who not to publish with, what advice is good advice and what advice you should absolutely disregard. Because there are a lot of bad actors out there who will try to take your money when you shouldn't. So I'd say that was my largest barrier. For instance, when I first started my publishing journey, there was a woman who was helping me with it. And she suggested that I like publish my book on Amazon and use Amazon's free ISBN. Well, if you know anything about publishing and ISBNs, then you know that once you do that, once you use Amazon's or, Ingram's or whoever's ISBN, technically they are the owner of that work because you use their ISBN. So really you have to go to Bowker and buy your own. So that's just like one of the first things. And when someone finally told me like, no, you have to go buy your own, I was like, okay, well, I was making this little series. It was going to be 3 parts. The first 2 parts are published on Amazon already. Like, how do I fix this? I mean, the answer was pretty clear. I just had to like finish writing the book, get it edited extensively so that it didn't like read exactly the same. So I was able to fix the problem, and that's how my debut novel was born. Um, but it was just like I could have avoided all that if I would have had like accurate information from the get. So now I try to counsel other people when they ask me about, well, how do you get published? I try to counsel them on the things that I do know so that they don't make the same mistakes I did. Because I really feel like it's important especially when it's Black authors, I really think it's important for us to succeed, whether it's indie or trad pub.
Definitely. I agree with that. There are a lot of people that I feel like take advantage of aspiring authors. That's for sure. Um, and it's the same in the kidlit space, 100%. And, in some ways, I'm not saying it's the same, but in some ways I feel like it's easier to be a little bit more nefarious because people will say like, "Oh yeah, I can illustrate your book," or things like that. And then they're actually using AI instead of
Oh my
like,
God.
doing the artwork. It's been really interesting, just trying to make sure that I navigate through that because a lot of people online with like YouTubers and trying to make fast cash online, they're like, yeah, you can just use ChatGPT and write your book, and then you can, use ChatGPT to illustrate your book, and then just put it all together and put it on Amazon, and then run a couple ads, and you'll be a millionaire. Like that's great. And it sucks because people just get sucked into that. Like those videos have millions and millions of views. I've seen them.
Mhm.
And I'm like, it can't be that easy. And then when I started working on my books, I was like, it's not that easy. Like there's no way. Um, so yeah, it's been very interesting. So I feel like now understanding how not to get taken advantage of has been like a
Mhm.
big part of the process. So, oh, go ahead.
I, on the topic of AI, like as a kidlit uh, author, because most kidlit, you're obviously going to have like a lot of photos and pictures. Have you run into an issue with people trying to use AI and get your business using that AI, using AI programs, or is that a problem you've been able to avoid by just hiring a human being that you trust and know?
Interesting. So I would say I don't really think that I've had any issues with people trying to get my business with AI. Mainly because I use like every single AI there is. So like I already know, like if someone uses AI, I'm like this is AI. Like don't try to do that with me. Um, but I do like using AI on my own terms for my writing. And I know there's a very big like debate of whether that's ethical or not, but I like to write my stories and write my first draft, and then I like to put it in like a chat GPT or something like that to critique it and let me know different things that it thinks about my writing. And then I'm like, oh, okay, like those are interesting things I may have not thought about. Or sometimes it's complete trash. I'm like, no, this isn't right at all, but like, nice try. Um, and then afterwards, I will like either make my changes depending on if I think it's good advice or not. And then I'll send that on to my editor, have my editor completely rework it because right now I write in rhyme. So like this book is all of my books right now that are out are in rhyme. So I can't have chat GPT or any sort of AI help me with that because I need it to be like perfectly metered. So I have to send it out to someone and have that all like redone basically. Um, so it's been an interesting journey. I also use AI to create concepts for my illustrations. So
Yes.
I might know like, hey, I want two shapes sitting on a picnic blanket. But to be able to tell an illustrator that like, hey, this is a very simple concept, but for later books, I have a little bit more intense concepts and like point of views. So I'll go into AI and get it to the point where I'm like, this is the point of view that I want. Like, this is not exactly what I want. Do not recreate this, but this is the point of view I want. This is the type of scene I want. This is like the height and everything like this. And I can make a mock up to show my illustrator. And that has been so useful because I can get what's in my mind out and show the illustrator instead of just telling them. So I think AI is a really powerful tool when it comes to like writing, especially when it comes to like illustrations in children's books.
I agree with that. I use not for my debut novel and not for this one, but for the book that I'm writing, that I'm going to be running my next crowdfunding campaign for. I have an AI mock-up for the cover, but like you, when I send it off to my cover artist, I'm going to emphasize like, hey, this is just a mock-up. Like, do not use this as your basis. You can
Right.
go and find whatever vectors and photos and shapes or whatever you need to kind of recreate it on your own terms, but like do not use AI for this, which I don't think that which I know my illustrator doesn't use AI because she's too proud of her work. Like she didn't even want to use like a character. She didn't even want to use artwork that I had paid for to go on the back of my book because she said, I didn't create this and I don't feel comfortable putting my name on it. So, I
Wow.
love having a cover artist who has integrity like that. And, I feel like every person that I've worked with to create my novels and stuff have had that kind of integrity. So, um, yeah, with the advent of AI, I just think there's a lot of gray space, in terms of like generative AI versus what do they call it? Like critique? It's not called critiquing AI. I can't think of the name for it, but like how Grammarly or how Pro Writing Aid can like help you fix your sentences versus them having the AI bots that like actually generate the content for you. It's too
Right.
oh assistive AI. I think that's what it's called. So assistive AI versus generative AI. But yeah, I think that's the whole thing. That said, we've got 5 minutes left. So is there anything else that you would like our audience to know?
Perfect. I just wanted to basically let everybody know that we are coming to our final days for Booktopia, which is a collaborative event held on BackerKit where you can back a ton of different amazing campaigns in different genres, such as kid lit, urban fantasy, horror, sci-fi, so many more. And I would love for you guys to come and check out The Blood Ties, a collection of 3 Covenant Blood shorts, and If Shapes Could Eat. Um, I am super excited to be so close. I'm about 72% funded. Kidlit projects are a bit pricey, but I do have like fun things that are in store, such as putting your name in the book, adding a cookie mix to your cart because I have a cookie mix that's based off of my book. And also little like speech language pathology play kits. What about you? Do you have some awesome things that are companions to your book?
Yeah, so for my short story collection, obviously we all are doing cross collab projects. So, if you back us and our partners, then you get, in my case, it's a pin. I don't know what you and your partner are doing. But we're doing vampire teeth and a cocktail where like the vampire teeth are like sucking the red drink from the cocktail. So it kind of looks like blood. But outside of that, I've got character art prints that you can get as an add-on. My debut novel is an add-on. There's like a little travel kit kind of thing that you can get. That's probably my most expensive add-on at $200. But I'm super excited about all of those. Um, and so I would just encourage everyone to support both of our projects. And if you can, also our cross collab partners. Mine is Anna McCluskey. She's doing I can't think of the title right now, but it's cocktail drinks. I'll post the link in a second when I find it. What about you? Who's your cross collab partner?
That sounds awesome. My cross collab partner is Katie, and she is going to be doing a book about a little girl that is playing hide and seek, but she has um a monitor for her diabetes that is going off beeping. So it's giving away her position, but also it's alerting her that she should go to her mom and tell her mom that she needs to get the intervention that she needs. But instead, she's trying to win this game. So
Um,
it's really a really interesting story, and Katie's illustrator is absolutely amazing, and it's in a beautiful book. So I'm excited to see all of these projects come to fruition.
yeah. Anna's is The Bloody Unicorn and Other Delightfully Dark Drinks. So it's a short story collection with illustrations. And there's a cocktail drink to go with every illustration and a
Ugh,
recipe.
I love that.
Yeah, it's so cool. Um, and with that, I think that is our time. So it has been great talking with you, Rella. I'm glad to get to virtually meet you, and I'm glad we could do this today.
Yes, thanks so much for all of your time, and I'm so excited. Have you met your goal already?
Yes, yes, I am funded, but I'm still hoping to get another $300 in our last 2 days. Because I really want to hit at least the first stretch goal, if nothing else.
And what is that before we go?
Oh, our first stretch goal is a bookmark. And I was gonna let my backers decide on the illustration that goes on it, or if they wanted a quote, and whether or not it was gonna be paper or metal.
Wonderful. That sounds amazing. Well, thank you so much for doing this with me, and best of luck getting your bookmarks to all of your backers. And I'm hoping to get funded as well.
Yes, I'm hoping you get funded as well too. Ooh, ignore my reminder, y'all. I
Oh,
don't